Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Ross. I'm the director of the USC Kazin Institute and a distinguished professor of history at USC. And on behalf of the Kazin Institute, I want to welcome you all today to our film screening of Waves Apart, which will be followed by a conversation between myself and the film director and USC Cinematic Arts alumnus, Josh Green. What happens when your passion conflicts with your heritage? This is the question that Josh Green poses in his short film, Waves Apart. After moving from a Chicago Jewish community to a small California surf town, Josh faced bullying and anti-Semitism as a middle schooler, prompting him to find an escape in surfing. Years later, as a college student and avid surfer, Josh decided to investigate the anti-Semitic history of surfing, a history that includes swastikas carved into the first commercially produced surfboards. Well, in addition to discussing his own history, Josh interviewed Jewish surfing legends Sean Thompson and Izzy Paskowitz about their experiences in the water and how they used their spirituality and Judaism to overcome hate. Let me tell you just a little bit more about Josh. He was born in Chicago and grew up in San Clemente. And living equidistant between San Diego and Los Angeles, he became enamored with the world of surfing and filmmaking. He had his bar mitzvah at the Surf History and Cultural Center in San Clemente, where he received his first video camera as a bar mitzvah gift. And as a senior at San Clemente High School, Josh won the inaugural Triton Film Festival. And after that, he obtained a BFA in film and television production at USC, where he also minored in screenwriting. In his final semester, Josh directed Waves Apart as his thesis documentary project. And shortly after graduation, the film was selected as a Student Academy Awards finalist. It was recently had its world premiere at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, and it's set to play at various film festivals around the country and hopefully abroad. We welcome Josh Green back to USC. Welcome back, and congratulations, Josh. I just want to let our audience know that Josh was one of 7 student filmmakers nominated for a Student Academy Award. And that's one of 7 out of 1,500 entries. That's quite an achievement. I'll talk with Josh now for about a half hour or so. And as we're talking, if you have questions, please enter them in the chat function, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Josh, you opened, well, not quite open, but early on, you have a scene of the Surf History and Cultural Center in San Clemente, where you had your bar mitzvah. And you mentioned that it wasn't until much later that you found out your parents had removed all the swastika boards that they had found. Has the center ever acknowledged the dark side of surfing's past or their own swastika collection?
Yes, amazing first question, Steve, and thank you for having me. So when I went there, I visited with the historians who keep up the museum. And they do a great job, actually, of holding these historic boards and acknowledging some of the complexities within surfing history, which is not always the case. I think the sport for a long time has been viewed sort of one-dimensionally as this beautiful and all-inclusive activity. But hopefully through research and films like this, we can show that there are different aspects to the sport that need to be brought to light.
Have you shown them your film?
I have. In fact, one of the members of the museum writes for my hometown paper, the San Clemente Times. He writes for their surfing column, and so he actually interviewed me and published an article about the film.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back just for a moment to your childhood. You said that your family moved from Chicago to San Clemente, where you were the only Jew in middle school. Can you describe your encounters with anti-Semitism at the schools?
I sure can. Growing up in a very monolithic community, I quickly realized I was one of the only Jewish kids, not just in school, but in town. And so at times it was very isolating, and I wasn't used to that type of isolation. I used to have Jewish friends that I could confer with, and at school, students would make fun of my skinny physique and compare my figure to that of a Holocaust survivor. And so surfing became not only this place of refuge where I could get away from a lot of the nastiness that I endured during school days, but it also provided me with a lot of physical strength and confidence so that I could subvert stereotypes about what a Jewish athlete could be.
And at that time, did you see when you turned to surfing, any connection between surfing and Judaism, or was it just an escape, physical escape?
I think I was too immature and too young to really appreciate that connection at the time. But surely, as I got older and I started to connect the dots more about some of these historical threads that everyone just saw in the film, namely the anti-Jewish imagery that you see in some of those old surfing films, that type of behavior is sort of swept under the rug in surfing history. Whereas I always watched that and felt a little uncomfortable by what I saw.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's discuss the history of surfboards. In the film, you say the first manufactured surfboards were the swastika Hawaiian surfboard made during I believe, the early 1930s. Who made them, and why were they decorated with swastikas, and why called the swastika board?
So the swastika model was a surfboard, and it's considered the first mass-produced surfboard made right here in Los Angeles. I believe Hermosa Beach is where they were making those boards, Redondo Beach area. And it was renamed to the Waikiki model surfboard in the late 1930s. And so a lot of surfers today are quick to dismiss the swastika board as something that's innocent, that is totally removed from the fascist imagery that we associate with Nazism. Although I think, and perhaps you agree, Steve, that there is a more complex picture. And we know what happened in Southern California during the 1930s with a rise of anti-Semitism and fascist imagery. And so there's definitely something there that isn't touched on enough.
Yeah, I'm just curious, once you started with the film and started looking at the past of the history of the manufacture of the boards, did you begin investigating Nazi influence in Southern California during the early 30s?
Absolutely, especially reading your work and interviewing you as well. I feel as though those two ideas, surfing in the Southern California at that time, and Southern Californian Nazi groups such as the German American Bund in Los Angeles, I don't believe that they were as far separated as a lot of surfers would like to say, if questioned on that topic. I think there's a lot of territoriality and almost overtly xenophobic ideas when it comes to surfing that often have overextended themselves into racist imagery and actions.
Yeah, when you interviewed me, we talked a little bit about, you were saying at first you wondered, well, is there any chance that the swastika could have been the Indian peace symbol? And I said, given the time it came out, I don't think that's the case at all, because LA was one of the major centers of Nazism in the United States during the 1930s. And I think just to give our audience a sense of how profound it was and how important the German American Bund was. First of all, German Americans were the largest ethnic group in Los Angeles during the 1930s, over 150,000 German Americans. Just, I think, if I remember correctly, more than double any other ethnic group. And every September, they would go up to von Hindenburg Park, which is now known as La Crescenta Park, 17 miles northeast of Los Angeles. And I have some brief documentary footage of the German Day celebration from September 1938. And there's a brief appearance by the head of the German-American Bund, Fritz Kuhn, who visits LA that year. So let's cue up this brief video and take a look at what Nazis in Los Angeles looked like in 1937.
In the 1930s, La Crescenta became the scene of many American Nazi rallies. They gathered in Hindenburg Park at the bottom of Dunsmore, today Crescenta Valley Park. The German-American Bund, a pro-Nazi group with ties to Hitler's Germany, was a relatively small organization, fewer than 6,000 members nationwide. Consequently, they were zealous to convert other German Americans to their cause. In La Crescenta, they infiltrated the Fasching Festival, Germany's equivalent to Mardi Gras. While locals enjoyed traditional German music, danced, drank beer, ate bratwurst, Nazi sympathizers gave speeches in support of the Fuhrer and the Third Reich. The Bund even rented biplanes and showered the Crescenta Cañada Valley with National Socialist pro-Nazi leaflets, what they called snowstorming. On Hitler's birthday, 1936, the year the Olympics were held in Berlin, Nazi supporters held their largest La Crescenta rally yet, a torchlight parade with over 2,000 attendees, though by then local sentiment had turned against them. When the war broke out, they all but disappeared from view. In 1944, however, 30 members of the German-American Bund, including those who organized the rallies at Hindenburg Park, were put on trial for sedition. After the death of the judge, the proceedings were declared a mistrial, and they were all released.
Yeah, I would say just a brief note on that at von Hindenburg Park during the summer, the Bund believed in physical culture, and they had Camp Sutter, which was a full-time camp to inculcate young boys and girls in LA in the teachings of Hitler's New Germany. Let's shift now to talking about the provocative title, Surf Nazis. When did the term first appear and who used it?
So from our research, we found that by the 1960s and 70s, that's when this idea began to emerge, especially visually, when you see La Jolla, San Diego surfers dressed up as Nazis, skateboarding and playing around at the beach. That particular incident is really jumps out in my mind because after making the film, I learned how Jewish homeowners were totally discouraged from living in that area by law. And so it's a really hurtful and profound irony that you have these white, perhaps Christian nationalist surfers parading on the beach in Nazi uniforms, saying it's all for fun and games at a time when Jewish people weren't even allowed to live in the area. Now, when it comes to surf Nazis, that idea, like I said, began then and continued to grow. Especially by the 70s and 80s, I think there's even a film called Surf Nazis Must Die. And it's a weird B-movie, sort of an exploitation film that features surfing. Definitely had mixed reviews at the time. This idea, this title, Surf Nazi, still to this day describes that overtly intense, sometimes vicious surfer.
Yes, that film came out in 1987 and did not get great reviews.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned something in the film documentary that I found interesting, which is what kicked off the surf wave in California was the movie Gidget that came out in 1959. And the irony is Gidget was based on a 1957 novel by Friedrich Kohne, a German Jew who had fled Nazi Germany. And it talked about the experiences of his young daughter, Kathy Kohne, the girl midget, therefore known as Gidget, who became a surfer and helped popularize it on the beach. Was it well known at the time that Gidget was in fact based on a Jewish girl?
It seems to me that within her clique, and I'm referring to Kathy, the real Gidget, within her friend group, they all knew about her because she herself was a Malibu surfer and she hung out with all of the iconic surfers of that era, including Mickey Dora. And when I interviewed her, she told me about how they vandalized her home. And there was actually a few years back when the New York Times covered this topic of anti-Semitism in surfing, there was a little bit of a misconception because rumor had it that a group of surfers burned a cross in her driveway, when in reality, Kathy corrected the story and said, oh no, they actually spray painted a swastika in my driveway. So I imagine that they weren't so happy when they found out that the movie that had totally exposed their beaches was all due to this Jewish family.
So talk a little bit about Mickey Dora, because you sort of see him, you set him up as the central surf Nazi of the early 1960s, that he was putting swastikas on surfboards, and you have the scene of him and his friends walking around in Nazi uniforms. Who was he? And did he call himself a surf Nazi?
Yeah, I can't say for certainty whether he called himself that, but his actions spoke louder than his words. Mickey Dora, to this day, is sort of hailed as surfing's dark prince. He's revered as this anti-hero of the sport who surfed incredibly well, and the darkness of his character speaks to his mystery and his awesomeness even. And growing up watching all of the surf documentaries, surf movies, he's featured in them all and praised for his surfing as well as his personality. Today, looking back at his records and the letters that he sent to friends, and obviously what happened to Kathy Kohne, it's very obvious that he is not the ultimate hero for surfing. And so it's really disappointing to me to see that some surfers are still clinging to that identity.
Well, I'm just curious whether was he an anti-Semite, or was he someone who thought that wearing Nazi uniforms and having swastikas on the board made him and his pals look cool and tough?
I have to believe, and I don't know him personally, but I have to believe that he didn't like Jewish people. And I say that because one of the surfers we filmed with, Israel Paskowitz, his father, the late, great Dorian Paskowitz, was a part of that Malibu surfing crew for some time. And he is on record saying how a lot of those guys, including Mickey Dora, did not like him because he was Jewish and did not like Jewish people.
And did they actually try to exclude Jews from surfing on their beaches?
It's hard to visually, I guess, point out whether someone's Jewish or not all the time. So I don't know if they had a way to physically enforce that. But as you touch on in the film, there weren't nearly as many Jews surfing back then as the few Jews that do surf now. And I think part of it has to also do with access to these communities. Like I mentioned with La Jolla, that's a premier surfing town, and Jewish people didn't even live in that area. And so, how are they supposed to practice on these intermediate to advanced surfing waves? They probably just took up other sports because it wasn't part of their culture at the time.
All right. Tell us a little bit more about the two Jewish surf heroes you interviewed during the film, Izzy Paskowitz and Sean Thompson. Why these two?
Sure thing. Well, Izzy, and his full name is Israel, which is also just really fascinating in and of itself. He lives right by my hometown, just a few miles from San Clemente, California, in South Orange County, and so it was a really profound and full circle moment filming with him because I had revisited my town, and he was this person who I always had heard about as a surfer, but I never realized we shared this common ground. And I had never gone out of my way to contact such surfing legends before, but I felt that because we were part of two tribes as surfers and as Jews, I could at least give it a shot. And so I went to his home and learned about his life and how strong his Jewish culture played an influence in his upbringing and still to this day.
And how did they see? Let's start with Izzy and his the 9 siblings altogether. How did they see links between surfing and Judaism?
Sure. Well, for Izzy, he had a very unique and somewhat sheltered childhood because he traveled the world in essentially a bus with his family. They all lived in this car and camped next to the car, outside the car, driving from beach town to beach town around the country. And because he was removed from public schools and the larger society, he didn't share a lot of the same, I guess, normal anti-Semitism that I found growing up in Southern California. But he did point out that having having Shabbat on the beach in front of a lot of his non-Jewish peers, that became very uncomfortable for him because a lot of his friends didn't understand what they were doing. Izzy likely didn't understand the significance of what he was doing and how it was so different from everyone else. But as he mentions in the film, he learned to be quite proud of that time.
Let's talk about Sean Thompson a little. First of all, I didn't know there was a Southern California or an International Jewish Sports Hall of Fame. And you tell us he's in both of them, right?
He is. And his impact on surfing is immeasurable. I failed to mention with Izzy, there's a whole documentary about his family, and there's a whole documentary about Sean's surfing legacy and how everybody looked up to him. So because he was such a legend, he had respect that transcended whatever religion or creed, ethnic identity he had. But he did explain that he's experienced his fair share of verbal harassment and anti-Semitism. And meeting with Sean, it helped me fully realize that being a Jewish surfer was something that I could fully embrace and identify with.
Sean talked about being targeted. Where was he targeted? Was it Southern California or was it more than that? Because he's surfing throughout the world.
So Sean grew up in South Africa.
Right.
So his situation is very unique and likely warrants another 20 minutes of filmmaking to get the full picture. But Sean described experiencing anti-Semitism specifically while in the army, and how Jewish soldiers were divided and were served only kosher meals. And so it was very easy for non-Jewish members of the South African draft to identify who they were. And he had that incident one day on a troop carrier while traveling in South Africa.
During the course of your particular surfing experience and the surfing with your friends, did you guys encounter anti-Semitism on the beaches?
For me personally, a lot of what transpired at school blended itself into the water, because the same kids that I associated with in classrooms, these were all the best surfers in town. And so a lot of them would take their same attitudes, even if they were bigoted, and bring them into the water. And to me, I always scratched my head because I thought maybe they could call me names or speak the way they did back on campus. But this is the ocean and we're all here to have fun. So why keep this up? For many people, I'll go as far as to say this: the ocean is a place free of consequence. And so people may keep their inner thoughts together in public society. And when out in the water where there's no police or authorities, and they're hyped up on adrenaline because of the waves, they're free to say whatever they want.
You know, when you're interviewing Izzy, at one point he says about his dad that water was his temple. Did he elaborate on that? The sort of, this whole idea of Shabbat on the beach, that there's kind of something mystical in the same way one can talk about mysticism within Judaism. What is this idea that water is my temple? And, for him and for yourself as well.
Well, I think, as humans, we've always lived near the water, or at least have tried to. And it's a very important part of all cultures. Scientifically, we can argue that we came from the sea, biologically, through evolution. We're all made of water. And so for me and for guys like Israel Paskowitz and his father, we recognize that. And I think the water is a very isolating experience in a good way, to find solitude. And so rather than spend time in a traditional temple or synagogue, for someone like Dorian Paskowitz, as well as Izzy Paskowitz, that's their way to pray and to connect with something otherworldly.
Yeah, at one point you have a scene of Izzy with his surfboard that has a huge Star of David on it. I'm just curious, did he ever get any flack from other surfers for that?
Not that I know of. It's a personal board that his father had made for him. And actually, when we filmed with him, it was wrapped up because it's somewhat of a collectible item for him. I don't think he actually brings it out to the water to surf. I personally wouldn't. I think that's the type of board that should be preserved and kept. It's an heirloom in a way.
Yes, and Sean Thompson also talks about water being his temple, and that he turned to surfing, particularly after the death of his 15-year-old son. He says he returned both to surfing and to shul. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, a lot of people ask, what happened to Sean's son, and his son passed away in a terrible accident at school playing what's called the choking game, where him and his friends were basically suffocating, and it's a really, really unfortunate thing. And a lot of people around the world have had trouble like that, and Sean didn't expect such a tragic loss. And hours before his son passed, his son Matthew shared with him a poem combining both Judaism and surfing. And he spoke about how in the poem, his father, Sean, surfs through the tube of a wave. And to navigate out of the barrel of that wave, he's looking for the light. He's surfing his way towards the light. And I think that's really the summary of how Sean was able to overcome his grief and to get his life back on track and to move forward.
And you end your film with you and several of your friends surfing in Malibu. And we see the scene of you praying and saying the Shema in the water, and then segueing to your own Shabbat on the beach. Is this something you did often, or is this something for the film, having Shabbat on the beach?
Well, that's a really amazing question because even before making this film, I was really reclusive about my own Jewish identity. Likely from growing up in a world where it wasn't seen as something I could do. And so in a way, I was inspired by Sean and Izzy to be proud of who I was and to find peers who would do something like that with me, have a Shabbat on the beach, surf together as members of a new tribe of Jewish surfers.
And just the last question, can you talk about that connection between surfing, spirituality, and Judaism that you and your friends feel?
Sure thing. Well, a lot of people today have positively reacted to the film. They ask me, Josh, now that you've learned about some of these stains on surfing's past, do you still surf? And I always say yes. I make it a goal to surf at least once a week. If anything, surfing in the ocean has taken on greater importance in my life because I view it more than just a hobby or a pastime. To me, it's a responsibility to go out there and to improve the sport, to connect with the ocean, and to take back the beach, just like we did as a group of Jewish surfers in Malibu.
All right, I have a bunch of questions from our audience, and I would ask those of you who are tuned in, again, if you have a question, please write it in the chat box and we'll try to get to it. The first one, very general. Well done, Josh. I wanted to ask how the reception of the film has been, and have you had any challenges since releasing it?
Sure thing. So as I just began to hint at, we've had a overwhelmingly positive response, and it's surprised me in many ways. The film has gone further than I would have expected, having made it as a student film. Now that I'm out of school, the film continues to reach new audiences. As far as challenges go, there is still to this day a particular amount of people in the surfing community who object to this type of story. In fact, there was recently a hit piece done online. Someone wrote about Waves Apart, and they hadn't even seen the film. They just commented on a short teaser trailer that I released, and how could I have painted surfing as being widely anti-Semitic because of X, Y, and Z? That's a straw man argument, and I think when people see the film, they recognize that we're not trying to say that surfing as a whole is blatantly racist or xenophobic, but in fact, there are, like I've mentioned, complexities.
In fact, that's one of our other questions. How has anti-Semitism evolved over time within the surfing community, and what have you witnessed in this charged political climate today?
Awesome. Well, I can hopefully say that surfing as a whole is improving. It's become more inclusive even since I've joined surfing over 10 years ago. But you still have an ugliness that exists, and it'll take time. Even the young USC surfer Mason speaks in the film about his favorite beach being vandalized by a swastika right after Hanukkah, and how only from the water could he have seen the symbol up there. So I think we'll still see that, especially in today's political climate. But hopefully, by telling stories such as this, we can help shine light on these topics.
Mm-hmm. And a question about, what impact Sean Thompson grew up in South Africa, and he grew up under apartheid. Did he talk about that at all with you? The impact of apartheid and then coming here and anti-Semitism on the beaches?
He did. And in fact, another point worth mentioning is how his parents were part of the generation that fought Nazi Germany. And so Sean was taught to stand up to that kind of hate and to stand up to bullying. And so he helped invigorate me with this sense of Jewish pride and independence that I think a lot of the Jewish community is lacking today.
Here's an interesting question from one of our audience members. More than 20 years ago, I talked to the, quote, surfing rabbi at the beach in Malibu. He signed his just published book about surfing. I made a small donation, and he talked about his experience as the surfing rabbi. Does anyone remember him, and did he play a role in fighting surf Nazis?
So I met and filmed with the surfing rabbi, but due to scheduling conflicts, he actually moved away from Southern California. We were unable to include him in the documentary, but I'm in touch with him. He's a very interesting person.
What's his name?
Nachum Shifrin, Rabbi Shifrin. And for a long time, he did reside in Malibu. I think he lives in Northern California now. But yes, and on that note, there are a lot of rabbis around not only the state, but the country who have recently contacted me hearing about the film, and they wish to share it at their own synagogues.
Question just came in. What was the most challenging part of making this film?
I think the willingness to be vulnerable about my own Jewish identity. Basically, I was going from keeping that to myself to then presenting it on the screen in front of not just my classmates at USC, but now the whole world. Anyone who sees the film knows that I'm Jewish. And as a kid, I didn't always know if that was something I'd be comfortable with. But now I can't help but feel proud, and I won't be deterred from being who I am by any hate groups around the country or internationally.
And I'm curious, since the film came out, have you found many in the process of making it as well? Have you added many new Jewish surfers to your crowd?
Do you mean to surfing?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we recently, one of our first screenings was to the Hillel at USC, and so many of those students came to me saying that they want to try surfing now, or that they are actually hesitant about trying surfing after seeing some of the dark sides that are exposed in our film. But I tell them, don't worry, there's enough inclusivity happening now. You should go out there and do it, and not be deterred.
Well, I know right now you're in the middle of taking this out on the film festival tour and seeing, what traction you get. But one of our viewers today wants to know, what's next for you? What's the next project?
Sure thing. Well, sort of as a spiritual sequel to Waves Apart, I was inspired to do another documentary related to Jewish culture because of a lot of rise in new forms of anti-Semitism we see in America. And I'm actually co-directing this project with an African-American filmmaker named Luke Harris, who also recently graduated from the USC School of Cinematic Arts. And we're pursuing a personal yet investigative documentary about the Black and Jewish relationship in America, and how our two communities have incredible overlap.
I just ask if anyone in the audience has more questions. We would be happy to answer them. Now's the right time to pose them. And Josh, is there anything that I haven't touched on that you think, our viewers today should know?
Well, I'll say this, out of all the interviews we shot, Steve, I think yours came out the most cinematically beautiful. So we, the filmmakers of Waves Apart, appreciate your participation in the film. We thank you for offering such a important historical and also personal context to help us finish this project.
Well, thank you. But I got criticism. I was told by my wife, do not wear a white shirt on camera. So I'm wearing a dark blue shirt today. I'm taking her advice. I want to thank you then, Josh, for being with us today and for screening Waves Apart and for exploring how Nazi ideology tainted California surf culture right from its inception. And this is yet another component of California's connection to Nazi culture before and during World War II. And we want to acknowledge the tremendous job you've done in uncovering this. Whenever I tell anyone that over the last few weeks that, in fact, since I first saw your film, I've been telling them about surf Nazis, and of course, it captures everyone's imagination. I want to thank you for making this visible and for making it a part of our everyday history right now. And for you, the audience, we hope that you can join us at our next event, which will take place on April the 2nd, and will feature myself in conversation with historian Matthew Dalick. And we're going to continue taking a look at anti-Semitism and right-wing politics. And Matthew who has just written a book on the John Birch Society. We're going to talk in general about the radical right and anti-Semitism, how bigotry has energized the far right from the John Birch Society to MAGA. And to all of you, if you're not already on our mailing list, please join. Just simply go online to Kasdan Institute and there'll be a place for you to sign up. I wish you all a wonderful evening, and I thank you again, Josh Green, and wish you great luck and hope you are the winner of this year's Student Academy Award. Thank you, Josh, and thank you, everyone else. We'll see you next month.